Well, here we are. I'm recording. I hope that we're on Facebook Live. It's what's called learning on the job. uh, Welcome to Wednesdays at 1, where I'm working on a series of 30-minute conversations about the topic of trauma. Now, trauma sounds maybe like a great big scary word, but it's just a description of overwhelm that's maybe gone to the nth degree, where our mind, our body, and our spirits are completely overwhelmed. And actually, our brains disconnect, our emotions take over, and the intellect just doesn't function very well. Now, today I'm going to be speaking about, well, the title is Trauma 206, and I'm going to be talking about how or where time and sequence come in. Time and sequence. I'll deal with that title a little bit later. But even if you haven't felt the overwhelm before the health crisis, certainly during all of this stuff, all this disruption to regular life, stay home orders, and all kinds of changes around us, I think we can safely say that we're all experiencing trauma to some degree. Our minds, our bodies, and our spirits are being affected. And even if in the past you've had a traumatic experience, right now, we're all in a season of trauma. And the other issue about this level of overwhelm is that it really causes us to act in very uncharacteristic ways. And there are reasons for that. We might get snappy. We're walking around in a fog and confusion. I've been experiencing it too during this time. I'm Sandra Allen Lovelace, and supporting women in the challenges of life is something I've been doing for about 40 years and across 5 continents. And as a matter of fact, I've come to understand that I've had a thread of trauma through my whole life. And my own healing, my own transformation journey has been going on for a few years now, and I've added training and more experience helping women in these specific areas. And I'm bringing all of that to you today as we talk about this topic. Now, let's see. I have notes here because there are some very specific things I want to cover. I want to thank you, those of you that have been chiming in when we actually meet, but also others who have been watching the recording. If you're watching a recording, again, this is still meant for you. And that is, thank you. Thank you for your patience while I have been doing this on-the-job training. Like right now, I'm not totally positive that I'm live over on Facebook. And I know there are ways that you can watch on your phone, I guess, for comments and who's here, and not up to that today. But I would like it if you would please put your name and maybe where you're from. If you just want to do your first name, that's okay. Where you're from, I'm going to be going back and going through comments over on Facebook later. And if you have comments or questions, even if you have, and especially maybe if you have something positive to say, or if you say, aha, that worked. Oh, good. Somebody else just came in. And then at the end, if you would put takeaways, that would be really helpful to me. All right, let's get into our topic. Time and sequence are definitely disrupted. They're definitely affected by trauma. And it's one of the areas that is shared by Bessel van der Kolk. I don't know why I was going to say something else. Bessel van der Kolk. He's a Dutch man who now lives in Boston and has an organization there called a Trauma Research Center. And he's been studying trauma his entire career. And he has listed these areas that I'm going through. Today, for a time and sequence, I want to point out the first thing that van der Kolk says, and that is that when trauma hits, time stops. Time stops. I think it's connected to, I don't know the physiology for sure, but I know for me personally, when trauma hits and that brain disconnect happens and I start running on emotion, that's when I notice that time stops. And the other piece of that van der Kolk points out is that we suddenly start to question the future. The future comes into question. Okay, time stops here. What's the future hold? Is there going to be a future? And I really pretty much felt that in our whole community and across the internet from what I could see around the globe at the beginning of the health crisis. What's going to happen? What's the future going to look like? Are we going to even have one? And so is it going to even last forever? And we begin to forget. We forget maybe what day it is. Not the typical, I'm really busy and I thought it was Thursday, but it's really Friday. Not that, but a continual losing track of time. Also losing track of tasks. We start something in the middle, forget where we are, or forgetfulness. Oh, that's right, I was supposed to go pick up something, but we haven't been able to go anywhere. And so that's why we forgot. We haven't been out of the house maybe in weeks. We really don't remember sometimes where we are or really what we're doing. What's our purpose? And that connects to several of the other areas that we've talked about before. Now, as has happened before in other topics, all this last week, I have been noticing that I have been stuck with this time and sequence issue. A few other disruptive things, I was adjusting fairly well, I thought, to the reopening phase. But I got disconnected again and let's just say out of balance. And so I had to pause and try to sort out what was going on. Let me explain. At the beginning of this week, I really started to feel out of touch with what was going on around me. The tasks that I have set for myself each day, I was struggling terribly to keep up. I have a very particular routine for my breakfast. Pull out the eggs and bread, put the bread in the toaster, etc. Make my little plate of fruit, which I call dessert. And several days, I realized I wasn't even keeping track of those small steps. I had everything ready to go, and then I put my egg in the frying pan and realized, uh-oh, I forgot my vitamins. What's wrong with me? What's wrong with me? Which is a very dangerous question. There's nothing really wrong. We're just experiencing a normal, physical, human response to stress, overwhelm, and when it starts taking over mind, body, spirit, there we are. We're right in trauma. I would think that I would recognize those signals by now, but anyway, there you have it. And so I have been having to get a hold of myself again. I'm a little bit better today because I've been running through these things as I've gotten ready yesterday, today, and at the gym this morning and so on. Checking my calendar became frantic. before I would go anywhere. Wait a minute, I better see what's on my calendar so I don't forget something. We're opening up here in South Carolina. I've been able to get out again. Also, another thing, talking about the future and the concern that, oh no, life is going to be like this forever. My days are always going to be, I'm going to be stuck at home. Yeah, I know that. And I remember that. If you've ever cared for young children or had children of your own or grandchildren that you've overseen, you'll remember those phases, won't you? They're going to be potty training forever. Am I going to have to carry diapers until they're 15? When am I going to be able to go somewhere without an entire load of snacks? I had one that had to eat regularly. And if I went out without snacks, I would get caught short. It wasn't pleasant for any of us. But those phases passed. They passed. And all this adjustment and so on about when is it going to end. Bringing myself back in line. All right. So that's how I've been experiencing this particular topic this week. Let me offer to you the number one thing that's been the most helpful to me. And that is this piece of information and truth. God is outside time and space. Actually, God invented time. He was around before we had time. And someone gave a good explanation. I was going to use a yardstick. Oh yeah, I guess I'll use this little because it's easier for you to see. Oh no, it isn't. All right, let me get my yardstick again. All right, this is a yardstick that someone used to explain, to describe time and God's existence in eternity. And I think it's a really good example. God invented time. Time has a beginning, it has a middle, and it has an end. And somewhere along the way, recorded history started, has a beginning, middle, and it will end someday. And in that measure of recorded history is my life and your life, somewhere on this time yardstick, this time. And when things happen that shake up time, they have no impact at all on God, because God is in eternity. God is out here. He's outside time. He's outside space. Nothing, absolutely nothing that jumbles us up throws God out of balance. Isn't that the most incredible thing? Now look, God, I want to give you some biblical background. So if you have a pencil, you might want to write these verses down. I'm not going to read them to you, but I am going to give you the references. The first one that I really like is Isaiah, I'm looking at my notes, Isaiah 57, verse 15. Isaiah chapter 57, verse 15. God lives forever in a high and holy place. Outside space. He's in some high and lofty, high and holy place. Also, Psalm 90, verses 2 and 4, as well as Psalm 93, verse 2, talk about, well, I'll do the first one first. Psalm 90, verse 2 talks about 1,000 years being like one day in God's sight. He's outside time. He's not there. He's in a high and holy place. And then also, John 4:24 tells us that God is a spirit, and we're to worship him in spirit and in truth. God is a spirit. He is not affected by things the way we are. I find that particularly encouraging. It's something to hang on to. More importantly, it's truth to rest in. And so when all this shaking up is going on, it makes a lot of sense to go to God, to spend time with him, to be in worship. Take that mind, body, and spirit that are all jumbled up by this fallen world and go and rest mind, body, and spirit in the presence of the Holy One, God Almighty. Secure as anything, because outside time and space, time and sequence is not an issue for him. Nothing, absolutely nothing erratic, nothing traumatic will ever shake him. I just realized this morning, I need to crawl back into his arms. I was doing fairly well before and then thought I was revived. I'm having a funny feeling that it's just going to be a lifelong crawling back into his presence. I just think that, snuggling in to who God is. All right, that's number one. That's number one, as a way to lean against the disruption of time and sequence. Another way to approach time and sequence disruption is from Bessel van der Kolk, actually. He points out that when we're uncomfortable, I'm sure he's done years and years of research on this, but when we're uncomfortable, stuff comes up. Stuff that we've buried down, tucked away. Maybe we could say that we folded it up nicely, like our laundry, before we put it away. And when we get unsettled, it's like all those things get thrown back into the dryer and jumbled up. And they're coming up. And really, that's a sign that we are in trauma. Things are happening and we're behaving in uncharacteristic ways, as I said before. And that's why we get off balance, the snappiness, making a nasty comment, something you would never do before or when you're settled, the confusion and the fog, a lot of what I was dealing with. I wondered if this would come up, and if it did, if I would feel comfortable enough to share, and actually I'm going to, and that is a lot of tears. I got so frustrated that I ended up in tears several times on Monday. And yet, van der Kolk's suggestion here at this place is to go ahead and feel what's going on. Let the feelings come. When that stuff comes up, pause and feel it to figure it out. And, well, it's an exercise that we did at the very beginning about, this is a signal, one of the early sessions that we did. This is the signal. What's the situation that brought it up? And then looking behind that to what is the source of it. And of course, that process is to help us figure out also what eases the trauma. And I've been learning for myself, movement is very important. And it's easier to get up and move my body and change what's going on there than to instantly figure out the emotions and change them, choose better ones, often opposite. Instead of anger, choose peace, that kind of thing, or thoughts. And so for me, one of the things that's suggested is to move, and that works really well for me. The second is to maintain my calendar. When things come up, I make sure to write them down, and then when they're done, I check them off. It helps me remember that things are moving forward on getting stuff done. And I know what's coming up, so I don't lose track of myself quite so easily either. Really, another strategy is for us to tend ourselves. It confirms, or if you didn't know it before, reminds us that we are valuable. We're busy caring for everybody around us, trying to give them their happily ever after, but we forget about ourselves. And that when we do that, and we're under stress, overwhelm, and trauma, that's when we start acting uncharacteristically, and we're not helping anybody else get to their happily ever after either. It's best to stop and tend ourselves, to pause, to be present with how we're feeling, and do something about it, to reach out. Maybe it's getting on the phone if you can't go out still, getting on the phone, FaceTime, or some other way to have lunch or dinner with a friend, or just a snack or a visit. But to be aware and make healthy choices. We've talked about this in another session too, but it's great to repeat it here. You see, one of the things that I talk about regularly is we need to know ourselves, that intimate inner part of who God designed us to be. Strengths and weaknesses, gifts and talents, areas where we need to grow, all of those things. And the more we get to know ourselves, the easier it will be to choose healthy options, not the drugs, not the alcohol, not the late night TV, not mindless numbing activities. Like we talked about that last time, but really things that will be helpful to get us back on balance. Now, a third area, all right, remembering who God is and making the most of our relationship with Him, then also recognizing that uncomfortableness, being out of our comfort zone, brings up stuff and how to deal with that. But also remember that things change. Things change. And I did mention this a little bit earlier when I talked about potty training. Remember, all of the children that you knew when they were little, that were in diapers, had to go through the potty training phase, probably they're all out of that by the age of whatever, pick one. Same with us. You know, there was a time when it's funny, I'm just remembering this one. I wish I had remembered it earlier, when I thought, oh, this is going to go on forever. I used to chew my nails, but I don't anymore. And I'm not sure why I didn't concentrate on it. I think that it's part of my healing, that as God has been settling me, teaching me about all these things, that my spirit is more at peace where I am. And therefore no nail biting at all. All right. Another thing to think about in all of this, if you can't pop up like I didn't right then, I mean, back then, I didn't think of the one that popped up just now, but the light outside, the light coming in your window changes. Stop and pause about that. Think about that. Notice, go sit by your window. Also, the sky changes. It's one of the things that I appreciate about living in South Carolina. There are beautiful clouds here. They actually remind me of the time that I've spent in the Netherlands. And I'm not sure exactly why the comparison's there, except that their clouds are beautiful in both places. And hanging up in the sky, they change, they move. It's as if God is creating a new landscape, naturescape, to display His beauty and presence. That His clouds remind me of His presence, but they're constantly changing as our thoughts and feelings change. Haven't you noticed that even though maybe the stay at home seems to have been consistent to the point of making you dizzy. The reality is that there have been changes in, we've had good days or good portions of days and harder days, even with the same circumstances. And our feelings change, our thoughts change. Like the days when we think, I'm not gonna make it. And the days when we're sure we're on top of this wave and we're gonna be fine right to the end. So change is not only inevitable, I guess that's a pretty much of a cliche, but change is a great thing to keep in mind when time seems to stand still and we lose track of sequence. All right, now I've presented these things today as a benefit for all of us while we are dealing with the health crisis. The reality is, and I've mentioned this before as well, the reality is I see the whole thing as an incredible opportunity to get to know myself, for all of us to get to know ourselves, rather than to take a crisis as a massive obstacle that's just throwing me off course, to actually embrace it as an obstacle that God's put in front of us to be able to figure out the strengths we have to work our way around it, to look at it and figure out its size, its shape, how it's affecting us, where my skills are, where my weak areas are too, where I need to grow in order to get around it to what God has planned for me. And now, bingo, we're right into one of my key verses about transformation, and that is that we are God's masterpiece, created in Christ Jesus with a purpose, designed in advance before the foundations of the world for us to enjoy. And that's the trek that we're all actually on during this time. I'm really praying for all of you that that's how this started, that I wanted to bless other women with whatever the Lord was giving me. And when I heard this lecture by Vandercook, the light went on and I said, all right, there are some specifics that I can share. Who knew? I certainly didn't, that he was going to actually walk me through each of these points personally as I was preparing to bring them to you. I'm thankful and I'm blessed. I hope that this has been a benefit to you. Again, if there's a takeaway that's you've been able to pull in, write it in the comments, ask your questions. I'm going to go through all of that later on. But I'm going to stop the recording now, say goodbye until next week. We've got 2 more topics to cover.